Hello, this is Andrea for the Learning Bear Podcast, your resource for wild professional development. Today we're doing a book review on the book called Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History. This is by Dan Flores. So this book definitely delivers the history it's promising in the title in a somewhat brutal fashion. There were times, especially after reading some lighter nonfiction books recently, that I was concerned I wouldn't be able to bear all of the death and destruction. But I was able to persevere, for good or for worse. Coyote America is certainly a supernatural journey. The terrible actions of humans towards coyotes almost seem implausible and certainly impossible financially, the amount of money raised to destroy this one thing. The Native American tales of their coyote deity are, on the other side of the spectrum, very wonderful to read about, even though they're kind of silly at times. But the natural history of the coyote is just sad. It's fascinating how resilient their species is. So before diving in to the bad stuff, the negative stuff that I certainly don't want to put too much emphasis on, let's look at the positive. The author, Dan Flores, is thorough to a fault. Because of my nature to feel pains of others, reading the negative events, one right after another, so detailed, were pretty hard to hear a lot of the time. But I have to applaud him because he was so detailed and thoughtful about this one thing's very long history, and he carefully weaves it in with human history as well. He has a variety of moments where he reflects on personal experiences with coyotes, both in Louisiana as a child and New Mexico as an adult. And he writes some very powerful and deep lines that are thought-provoking throughout. And again, I applaud that. That's pretty amazing. In an attempt to stay objective as well. You know, you have to kind of give credit where credit is due. In addition to that, I've always loved learning about other cultures' religious or spiritual guides and deities. I've always been fascinated by mythology. I love learning about it. Here, Flores discusses the Native American culture and their connectedness with the sacred coyote, and he tells some of their legends, and some of them are a little bit perverse, but they're very interesting, and I wanted to read more. I have always admired the Native American people for loving and caring for the world around them, a trait that I wish more people demonstrated. There are a few things that I personally liked as an environmental educator as well as just a human, but these things may not appeal to other readers, so I apologize if this next section isn't attractive to you. The first is that as an educator, I've heard a lot of the big naturalist names for years, and I'm really proud that I remember and learned them prior to reading this book. I've been studying environmental education for a little over 5 years, and all these names, Aldo Leopold, John Muir, John James Audubon, Rachel Carson, and a lot of others, they were brought up so long ago, and it's not information that I use on the regular basis. So the fact that I remember how powerful these figures were made me feel pretty good. I also love the pictures that he sprinkled throughout the book because some of the chapters are just so long. They break up the story, and I definitely appreciate that. Finally, I found the reference to Walt Disney and his attempt to speak out about the coyote issue via film very intriguing. Of course, movies are sometimes a product of their time. Like Flores mentions, Lady and the Tramp was done kind of speaking out against the dog scourges in cities, for example. I guess I never really held much significance with these movies because, they're kind of marketed as children's entertainment, but they do a lot of times tend to be more than that. I remember the first time I watched Mary Poppins as an adult, and I thought, this is hilarious. I never caught any of those jokes when I was a kid. So one of the negatives, I would like to mention that although I found them as negatives, these may not be negatives for all people, and one of them is definitely not the author's fault. So the first problem I have is that the chapters are just too long. I struggled, I'm starting to read it, and then I would get pulled away. And you kind of get lost in the sauce with these big, long chapters. It's not like you can be like, okay, I only have a paragraph left before the chapter. the chapters are in excess of 40 pages long sometimes, and it's just too long. I don't know if it would ever be feasible to break up the chapters, but this thoroughly detailed accounts add so many pages. Not necessarily unnecessary information, just so much at once. You need a break, you know? Anyways, I would also mention that reading with a dictionary might be a good idea. The author, at least at times, seems to have used extravagant words just to use them. I'm sure he's a very smart person. I have no doubt about that. But sometimes the words just seem out of place and unnecessary. I can understand, again, trying to be objective, that in a long, detailed book like this, a thesaurus sort of helps break up the monotony of frequently used words. And I can get on board with that, but sometimes they're just ridiculous. Or they're so obscure that you don't know them anyway. You have to really either look at a dictionary or you have to kind of search through the context to figure out what they mean. So if you read this book, definitely have some way to look up those big words for you. Unless you're just as brilliant as the author is, then you already know them. Finally, the negative that I have left to last to mention is not one that the author has any control over. The incredibly terrible saga of the Coyote history is intense. It is horrible to read about. I knew it would be difficult going in because predators of all kinds are feared by humans for reasons I don't particularly understand, especially having sort of a well-rounded view of nature. But it was pretty horrific, especially with some of the added images that he has throughout. If you're looking for a lighthearted nature book, this is not it. If you're looking for a dark challenge, this is the book for you. You've been warned, to say the least. Humans are so devastating despite our supposed quote-unquote superior intellect. The Coyotes, thankfully, have outsmarted us for centuries and are still around today. And I think that's the best part of the book, is how resilient and clever Coyotes have become over time. As for my scoring of the book, it's difficult to do because I did struggle a lot, but I'm attempting to be objective. So for content, I give full marks because it's just exceptionally thorough. I don't think there's a single moment of Coyote history that was even remotely left out. Flores needs a medal for all this research and knowledge. It's insane. The structure I'm giving a 4 out of 5 because the chapters are just too long. Like I said, some of them are over 40 pages. It's just too much. And this isn't big print either. It's small, typical print, 40 pages, too much. The reader needs a break. At least I do. Okay. However, the history itself is done quite nicely. What somewhat follows a chronological line. So structure, 4 out of 5. As for meeting standards, he mentions the introduction in the following. I attempt to tell the story of this American original from the evolution of the canid family in North America 5 million years ago, ... Without question, he does that. So 5 out of 5. He tells every single marker in Coyote history to the point I feel like a Coyote expert at this point. I'm like, could I give a lecture on Coyotes? And finally, creativity. And this one's kind of difficult for nonfiction books because they're not really going for creativity. They're going for facts. But I feel as though Flores has covered every part of the Coyote story and done so in the most creative ways. And he met even with some really destructive people who have been trying to figure out how to rid the planet of coyotes. That's commendable. So in sum, 19 out of 20, it's a 95%, still an A. I recommend it. I recommend Coyote America by Dan Flores, but I do so with kind of like a footnote. It is not for the faint of heart. If you are feeling weepy or sad already, do not read this book. It is not lighthearted and wistful. It's not a tale of happiness and sunshine and flowers. It is sad. Okay, it is a tale of woe and resilience. If that interests you, by all means, get on board. Get this book, Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History. That's it for me today. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.